Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Tech News Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Adam Felsen, and let's get straight into the tech news. Alright, starting off today's episode, we have a little bit of a story that kind of deals with technology, but more so deals with video games and a telethon, actually. So, what this story is about there's an organization called Stand Up to Cancer, and they do what they say in their name, try to stand up, defeat, find a cure for cancer. And this Friday, actually, they're doing kind of this big celebrity-filled event on TV, and there's a game called Fortnite out, and it's super popular, and what I think is really cool is that there's going to be a bunch of streamers that are going to be trying to face off for 2 hours from 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And the whole point of this stream is kind of like a pre-stream or a pre-event to the big televised event for Stand Up to Cancer. And it's really just about bringing awareness to the organization and kind of having fun with a bunch of people. And it's rumored that some celebrities that are going to be on the real live televised event may show up, but nothing has been confirmed yet. Moving on to our next story. It's actually about something cool Microsoft has done, and what this story is about is they made an adaptive controller in conjunction with a bunch of different organizations, including Able Gamers Charity, the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, Craig Hospital, Special Effects, and Warfighter Engaged. And what the idea of this controller is to kind of bring gaming to a wider audience, and more specifically, an audience that really wasn't able to play games or had a lot of difficulty with it before. Now, what I'm talking about is newly released, and early release, may I add, Xbox, what they're calling it here is Xbox Adaptive Controller. And it was supposed to come out on September 29th, but they released it early, and I'll show a picture of it right here. But as you can see, you kind of have two big discs. Now, I'm not sure if those are kind of touchpad-esque discs or if those are kind of buttons that will correspond to other things. On the left side, obviously, you have your D-pad and different buttons. I believe one of them, the 3-bar button, is kind of to bring up a secondary menu, and the split screen button is for split screen and stuff. I'm not super familiar with an Xbox controller and the different functions. And then if you see on the back, which I'll throw another picture in here, it's got a bunch of hookups for different buttons that correspond to each individual control. Now, one example that I found online was they had different buttons, physically just big, large buttons, so instead of having to necessarily do things like this, even if you have just a stump, you can just kind of hit that button to correspond with a specific control. Now, that's really cool because if someone is either disabled and they have trouble, or if they have arthritis, or they're missing an arm or a leg or what have you, there's different things that you can use as input controls now instead of having kind of your standard controller. So this is available on Microsoft.com, and it sells for $100. And if you want to buy it for someone who has issues gaming that you know, I totally recommend it. It seems like a really cool idea. No word yet if, this is just speculation, if maybe Microsoft might be donating a portion of the proceeds from the specific controller to some sort of gaming charity or what have you to kind of bring more people into the fold. I think they should. I don't think they will, but I'll look forward to keeping you guys updated with more information on that. Here's a really good one for us in California, and if you're watching this and you're not in California, talk to your senators because you're probably going to want this if you're a technology dude like I am. The Verge is writing that California is now starting to pass net neutrality laws for the state itself, but they're even going further than what the original net neutrality laws that Obama put in were. Right now what they're doing is they're outright banning the practice of what they call zero rating, or giving free data on mobile networks for the advantage or disadvantage of other companies. For example, you have, I believe T-Mobile was offering Netflix and you could stream Netflix specifically for free without going against your data cap if you streamed it at 480p DVD quality and what have you. I believe Sprint was doing Hulu. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were also, I think Sprint was also offering Tidal. T-Mobile was offering Pandora and Spotify, but you guys get the point. Now, obviously, the companies and the products and the services that are not included in that are left at a disadvantage because you're usually going to want to gravitate towards the product that won't necessarily go against your data count, because then you can either stream it for free, essentially, or you could do more and use those specific services as to not go against your data count. And right now it is going to Governor Jerry Brown. The thing is, though, is that when net neutrality was repealed by Ajit Pai, it says here that he specifically, or the law specifically during the repeal, made it technically illegal, or illegal if you will, for any state to specifically make their own kind of net neutrality. And obviously the internet companies are going to be wanting to sue for this because net neutrality can make them a lot more money by throttling and doing all of these things. I personally haven't experienced a ton of issues necessarily with net neutrality living in the state of California. I'm very appreciative of that, but I'm sure that they are out there, and it's good to see that California is kind of being California and doing what's necessarily best for the consumer. A scarier one, and something I'm really passionate about, but I'm virtually against it. So what I'm talking about here is that there was a big Five Eyes pact, and it was between the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I'm reading this from an article from The Verge right now, and they kind of are starting to ask, and I put that in quotations for a reason, the different big tech companies to build backdoors into their devices. Now, a little history behind this. There was a shooting in San Bernardino, and the FBI wanted to have access to the shooter's locked iPhone because they thought they would pull more information either behind the motive, or if this was only him, or what have you behind it. Now, Apple refused, and there was this big debate over whether Apple should or should not refuse. Now, jumping back into present time, I've heard from some people that there are companies now, and there are devices and boxes and what have you that will break a passcode, and Apple can't do much about it. But they still have to go out and obtain these devices, and they still have to be legal if they want to use them in a court of law. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to, in this case, ask all of these companies, so Google, Samsung, and Apple specifically is what comes to mind. Then you have other companies, possibly like Lenovo, which makes the Moto line of phones, the OnePlus, and all of these other Chinese knockoffs or other Chinese phones that have come to the US. Now here's where my opinion comes in. You're entitled to your own. I think that the more backdoors we have in our devices, the more control the government can have. Now you can argue that, well, government needs to monitor everything and regulate, and in a lot of ways, you're right. I think that government needs to get more involved in certain aspects of technology, but I believe backdoors is not one of them. And especially if we look at the case with Edward Snowden really fast, who was the leaker who leaked all of those NSA PRISM stuff, they're collecting huge amounts of data. And if there's already a backdoor built into it, well, what's to say that they're not going to do the same thing even on our personal phones? And what that backdoor would mean is, with the whole NSA and collecting the data, they only collect what goes through cellular networks in your home. They're not necessarily collecting pictures and encrypted text messages and what have you, because they really can't. But if they're on your phone and they have a backdoor into it, then they can go through and look on the apps on the phone itself and kind of be able to get in and pull information off of it. Now, The plus side argument to this would be, well, if there's a killer or an accident or a terrorist attack, and the argument could be made that there's information or contacts or what have you on the phone, then the government should be able to pull it off. And you're absolutely correct. And that's why it's a tricky subject and a tricky argument, because there's two good arguments on both sides. So let me know what you think. I'm personally against it. You may be for it. I'm always open for debating and conversation. There's no guarantee it won't happen. It's just right now the governments are kind of taking the nice guy approach, as I like to call it. They're asking the companies to do this, but they may start trying to take legal action, and they may start trying to force and enforce these companies to do it, or else. And that will be interesting, because I really hope, and I would almost be betting on it, that these companies are going to rebel, or they're going to take it to court and what have you. And it'll be an interesting legal battle or later, because the big thing is precedent. And if you set a precedent that the government has access to the devices in the back door, then you kind of get into some tricky areas, and that can be used as leverage to get more and more and more information.